3-year-old girl living up to the perfect image her mother, a popular TikTok personality, had shown the world. But in that small Solihull apartment that night, those cries became something that caused the two adults to lose control. And the most terrifying thing was, the warning signs had appeared long before that final night.
Welcome back to crimedelvi. My name is Luca. Today, we're going to revisit one of the cases that shook England, to see the fragile line between a mother's instinct and the cruelty of evil. Now, let's begin.
Kaylee Jade Priest was born on May 13, 2017. She is the daughter of Nicola Priest and Leon Wright. Like many young families without clear direction, Nicola Priest and Leon Wright separated when Kaylee was still very young. They were not living the same kind of life. Leon Wright wanted stability. Nicola Priest did not care about that. She lived impulsively, lacked responsibility, and spent most of her time on herself, especially on social media. After the separation, the court granted full custody of Kaylee to Nicola Priest. This was a legal decision based on the circumstances at the time. Kaylee lived with Nicola at Kingshurst House Apartments in Solihull. It was considered a stable environment by UK standards. The streets were clean. The neighborhood was well planned. Many young families chose to live there because it was quiet and safe for raising children. On the morning of August 9, 2020, police and emergency responders received a 911 call from an apartment in Birmingham. The caller was Nicola, Kaylee's mother. She reported that Kaylee was unresponsive. When emergency crews arrived at 11:17 a.m., they entered the room and immediately noticed that the scene did not match a situation where an emergency had just occurred. Nicola was lying on the bed, crying, repeating that she thought Kaylee was no longer alive. But she was not next to Kaylee. She was not performing any life-saving actions at that time. Kaylee was lying on the floor right beside the bed, on her back, wearing a pink pajama top and blue shorts, unresponsive. The responders approached and examined her. Within seconds, they determined that Kaylee's body had already become stiff. Her lips had turned dark. These are signs that do not appear immediately. They only occur after the body has been inactive for a certain period of time. In other words, Kaylee was dead before the call was made. At 11:25 a.m., Kaylee was officially pronounced dead. At the scene, Nicola began explaining what had happened the night before. She said Kaylee had been put to bed around 7 p.m. During the night, Kaylee vomited 3 times. Nicola claimed the last time she checked on her was around 10:30 p.m. before going to sleep. After that, she did not check on Kaylee again. The next morning, around 10:30 a.m., Nicola said she woke up and found Kaylee unresponsive. She stated that she carried Kaylee to the floor and attempted CPR before calling emergency services. Nicola also mentioned another detail. She said that about 2 weeks earlier, Kaylee had fallen off a play table and hit her head. According to Nicola, there were no obvious signs of injury afterward. Kaylee continued her normal activities. However, Nicola also admitted something else. In recent days, Kaylee had been eating less. She was no longer eating normally. All of this information was provided directly to the emergency responders, and it was all documented. But when compared to Kaylee's actual condition at the scene, those explanations started to no longer align. However, when emergency responders examined Kaylee's body more closely, what they saw did not match Nicola's explanation. There were clear signs of injury on Kaylee's chest and torso. Bruises appeared in clusters along her side. In the center of her chest, there was a red abrasion. These were not injuries that could be explained by a single fall, as Nicola had claimed. At the same time, they looked at the surrounding space. Kaylee's bedroom was almost completely empty. There was no proper bed. Only a small, dirty mattress. No sheets, no blanket, no curtains. There was nothing to suggest this was a space prepared for a 3-year-old child. Police took Nicola and Callum in for questioning shortly after. And from that point on, the story began to shift. What really happened to Kaylee could no longer be hidden. On TikTok, Nicola was not an unknown account. She posted videos regularly. In many of them, she appeared with Kaylee. The way she presented herself was clear. Close, cheerful, a mother enjoying time with her child. That image was repeated enough times for viewers to believe it was real. But after Kaylee died, Nicola did not disappear from social media. She kept posting. She uploaded tribute videos. She wrote that she loved Kaylee. She said she would never forget her. She showed emotion in front of the camera. Then she posted another video. She cried. She sang along to a song with the lyrics, "I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, I know I did so many things wrong. I should have done better." A few days later, Nicola continued posting tribute videos. The same message, the same presentation. But then there was a clear shift. Just one day later, she returned to her usual content. She posted dancing videos. She said dancing helped her feel better. Then she posted makeup videos. She said everything was perfect. All of this happened in less than 2 months after Kaylee's death. By late September 2020, investigators determined they had enough evidence. Nicola and Callum were arrested on charges directly related to Kaylee's death. This was no longer a suspicion. This was a case involving fatal abuse. The autopsy results showed that the cause of death was severe injuries to the chest and abdomen. These injuries were consistent with forceful impact, such as punching, kicking, or stomping. This was not an accident. More importantly, some of the injuries had already begun to heal. They were estimated to have occurred about 2 weeks earlier. This confirmed something critical. Kaylee had been abused before. Not once. Repeatedly. Experts compared the trauma to injuries from a collision at around 40 miles per hour, or a fall from a height onto a hard surface. This level of force goes far beyond anything in the normal daily life of a 3-year-old child. Both Nicola and Callum denied the charges. Neither took responsibility. Each blamed the other for the abuse. But when the case went to trial in June 2021, what really happened began to come into focus. The way Kaylee had been treated was no longer based on statements. It was established through evidence and testimony in court. And when everything was laid side by side, the question was no longer, what happened? The question was, how did this go on for so long, without being stopped sooner? Before Callum entered the picture, Nicola had been in a relationship with Dan. During that time, Kaylee lived with Nicola in an environment where the problems had already begun to form. Dan had seen bruises on Kaylee, but believed they were the result of her being active and prone to bumps. Like many other children, he did not believe Nicola could harm her own child. But at the same time, When Nicola and Kaylee were living at the home of Lisa, Dan's mother, a very different picture emerged. Lisa did not just hear about it. She witnessed how Nicola treated Kaylee firsthand. Nicola did not call Kaylee by her name. Instead, she used demeaning terms like rat, not once, repeatedly. Lisa confirmed at least 6 separate instances where Nicola used force against Kaylee as a form of punishment. These actions did not happen under unusual circumstances. They happened when Kaylee was doing normal things, like asking for food or seeking attention. A 17-year-old babysitter also described 2 specific incidents. One when Kaylee asked for food, and another when she interacted with her younger sibling. Both times, Nicola responded with anger and physical force toward Kaylee. When the babysitter tried to intervene, Nicola did not stop. She grabbed Kaylee, dragged her into the bedroom, and separated her from others. What was happening inside the apartment was not completely hidden. A neighbor living downstairs reported hearing repeated loud impacts from above, followed by Kaylee crying. And shortly after, Nicola's voice saying she would explain that Kaylee had fallen off the bed. Other neighbors also confirmed they frequently heard Nicola yelling at Kaylee, telling her to be quiet or go away, but never heard any words of comfort. And there was one detail that repeated clearly. Every time Kaylee cried, music would be turned on, loud enough to cover the rest of the noise. When all of these details are placed side by side, this is no longer a set of isolated incidents. It is a pattern of repeated behavior with a clear context, multiple witnesses, and it existed over a period of time before the final incident occurred. The relationship between Nicola and Callum lasted only about 3 months before Kaylee died. But in that short time, Nicola made very clear choices. She was a single mother, in debt and behind on rent. Yet she still withdrew over $1,000 to buy Callum a BMW. Meanwhile, Kaylee was living in a room lacking basic necessities. This was not a financial issue. This was about priorities. When Matthew went with Callum to buy the car, the actual price was much lower, and Callum kept the difference. Nicola did not know, but what matters is that she still trusted him and continued the relationship. Callum did not hide his behavior. He had poor control, a short temper, and was willing to put others in dangerous situations. In one incident, Callum fled from police while driving, with Kaylee and her younger brother in the car. A speeding vehicle, 2 children in the back. That was a decision that could have had serious consequences. But after that, Nicola did not leave. She chose to stay. Inside the apartment, the way Kaylee was treated was even more clear. When Callum wanted to be alone with Nicola, Kaylee was placed behind a stair gate, kept there as a way to separate her from the shared space. A 3-year-old child standing alone, blocked off by a gate, while the adults stayed on the other side. This was not discipline. This was exclusion. When you look at the full picture, money spent on Callum, dangerous behavior ignored, and Kaylee pushed out of her own living space. One thing cannot be overlooked. Nicola chose Callum, and that choice had direct consequences for Kaylee. At trial, the prosecution did not begin with images or forensic reports. They started with text messages. Short lines, but enough to show how Nicola and Callum truly saw Kaylee when no one was watching. In one exchange on July 24, Nicola wrote, "I'm going to kill her. because she keeps leaving the living room or going into the kitchen. So I hit her again and struck her on the bottom. Callum replied, "Good, hit her one for me." 3 days later, Callum sent another message. "I'll keep that little bitch away from me. I'm sick of your daughter." These messages were not spoken in a moment of loss of control. They were written, sent, and responded to. That shows this was how they thought about Kaylee. Not as a child who needed protection, but as a problem to be pushed away. The prosecution emphasized that these messages painted a clear picture of their attitude when no one else was around. At the same time, the court reviewed CCTV footage showing the last time Kaylee was seen on August 7. In the video, Kaylee was still moving around, trying to interact like any 3-year-old child. She tried to get Nicola's attention, but Nicola did not respond. She looked at her phone. She checked her reflection in the mirror. They stood next to each other, but there was no connection. When the elevator doors opened, Nicola stepped out first. Kaylee followed behind. The doors closed. That was the last moment Kaylee was seen alive. And when those messages are placed next to that footage, one thing becomes very clear. The way they talked about Kaylee and the way they treated her matched completely. On the evening of August 8, Matthew was at the apartment of Nicola and Callum. When he arrived, Kaylee was wearing pink and white pajamas, sitting alone at a small table placed in the corner, eating frozen food. No adult was sitting with her. There was no interaction. After she finished eating, Kaylee stood up, moved around the apartment, playing and bouncing like a normal 3-year-old. Around 7 p.m., Callum took Kaylee into the bedroom, while Nicola stayed out on the balcony smoking. Callum remained in the room for about 10 minutes. Then Nicola went in as well. Matthew heard low voices coming from inside, but could not make out what was being said. After a while, both of them came out of the room. Kaylee was not asleep. She stood behind the stairgate at the doorway, holding and shaking it, trying to get out. No one came back. No one responded. Sometime later, Callum's voice came from the hallway, saying that Kaylee had vomited. Nicola went into the room to change the bed sheets, while Callum prepared bath water. Everything happened quickly, but there were no signs of an urgent response. After about 10 to 20 minutes, both of them returned to the living room as if nothing had happened. At that point, Callum began acting hurried, asking Matthew to leave. There was no clear explanation, just a sudden shift in attitude. After leaving, Matthew came back to get his personal belongings. As he passed Kaylee's room, he looked inside. Kaylee was lying on the bed, her body covered by a blanket, only her head visible. There was no clear movement, no sound. Later, at around 11:17 p.m., Nicola and Callum were still texting each other. The messages focused on Kaylee continuing to vomit and acting uncomfortable when being checked. But shortly after, the conversation shifted. Nicola began talking about Callum visiting, and the two exchanged affectionate messages. When looking back at this entire timeline, one thing stands out. Everything happened in sequence. There were witnesses, there were specific time points, but there was no response that matched Kaylee's condition. At trial, the jury heard a critical conclusion. If Kaylee had been taken to the hospital earlier, she could have survived, but that did not happen. From the time Kaylee first showed signs of distress to when Nicola called for help, about 13 hours had passed. 13 hours with no medical intervention. 13 hours with no emergency action. By the time the call was made, it was too late. Both Nicola and Callum denied responsibility. Neither admitted to causing what happened. But after reviewing all the evidence, the judge reached a clear conclusion. Both were at fault. According to the court, Kaylee was not a priority in that apartment. Her crying, her attempts to go out and play, the normal behaviors of a 3-year-old were treated as a nuisance. And that frustration led to violence directed at Kaylee. The symptoms Kaylee showed afterward, including vomiting, were not from a natural illness. They were the body's response to severe trauma. In the end, Nicola was convicted of manslaughter and child cruelty, receiving a total sentence of 15 years in prison. Callum was also convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 14 years in prison. This is the legal ending. But for Kaylee, everything had already ended much earlier. At the moment when a child needed help, and no one acted soon enough. The case of Kaylee Jade Priest does not end with the sentences given to Nicola Priest and Callum Redfern. It leaves a bigger question: how a 3-year-old child could remain in danger for days without being protected in time. Throughout the Kaylee Priest child abuse case, Kaylee did not disappear from society. She was still there, inside an apartment, surrounded by adults, surrounded by warning signs that had already appeared. For parents, especially mothers over 30, who have lived enough to understand the value of a child, this story is not just infuriating, it is deeply painful, because a mother's instinct is to protect, to shield, to put her child above everything else. And when you look at how the Nicola Priest case unfolded, what is impossible to accept is not just the outcome, but the choices that were made leading up to it. What Nicola did in the Kaylee Jade Priest case was not a momentary mistake. It was a pattern of repeated conscious actions, and each one pushed Kaylee further away from the safety every child should have. This is not the image of a mother. This is behavior that must be clearly condemned without excuse. This case is also a direct reminder of the responsibility of the community in child protection cases, not just parents, but anyone who sees warning signs. Because in cases like the Kaylee Priest case in the UK, silence is not neutral. Silence can allow things to continue until they cannot be undone. Protecting children is not a choice. It is a responsibility, and sometimes speaking up at the right moment may be the only thing that prevents a story like this from happening again. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to follow along with our next true crime documentaries. Looking back at the tragedy of Kaylee Jade Priest, I'm haunted by a bitter truth. Danger sometimes comes from the very people a child trusts the most. But you know what? When I looked through other case files, I realized the dark world doesn't just target innocent children. Even adults, independent, successful, and seemingly perfect individuals, can still become targets of sophisticated manipulation and violence. Now, I want to lead you into one such story, a case involving an adult that shocked me just as much: the tragedy of the beautiful influencer Alexis Sharkey. Alexis Lee Sharkey was born on July 30, 1994, in Warren County, Pennsylvania. From a very young age, people around her remembered her as a smart, outgoing girl who always carried a very special kind of energy. Alexis Sharkey's parents were Richard Robinaugh and Stacy Robinaugh. She was the oldest daughter in the family and had 2 younger sisters, Tiffany Robinaugh and Abigail Robinaugh. The three sisters grew up together in rural Pennsylvania. In 2016, Alexis graduated from the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford with a degree in biology. At one point, her family believed she would pursue a career in medicine because Alexis had a very analytical mind and took her studies extremely seriously. But after college, her life took a completely different turn. This was the moment social media started exploding across America. Instagram was no longer just a place to post photos. It had become an entire industry, and Alexis quickly immersed herself in that world. She joined Monat, a beauty and hair care brand that was hugely popular on social media at the time. In a short period of time, Alexis built the image of a successful lifestyle influencer. Luxury travel, fashion, beauty, poolside parties, and a life that tens of thousands of followers admired every single day. On Instagram, Alexis almost always appeared with a bright smile. Perfect, confident, full of life. In the summer of 2017, after being engaged for some time, Alexis suddenly called off her engagement with her fiancé. People close to her said that period affected her deeply, even though on the outside, Alexis still tried to appear stable and positive, like she always did. And honestly, that was pretty much how Alexis handled everything. Some former co-workers from Twin Peaks later said they were the ones who helped Alexis get through that difficult chapter of her life. And it was there that she met Thomas Sharkey. Tom was a regular customer at the restaurant. He was nearly 2 decades older than Alexis, had a large, muscular build, and often came across as experienced, confident, and very charismatic in conversation. According to Alexis' friends, Tom was extremely good at making people around him feel comfortable. One of Alexis's friends later recalled that she could almost see the connection between the two from the very first conversations they had. Tom worked in oil and gas consulting, a job that frequently took him across different states and countries. For Alexis, that was especially appealing. She already loved traveling, loved the feeling of freedom, and was drawn to the image of a mature, experienced man who always seemed to have stories about life on the road and traveling abroad. Their relationship moved pretty quickly. At the time, Alexis was beginning to build her influencer image on social media, while Tom seemed to offer her a sense of stability, maturity, and security after her broken engagement. At least, that's what people saw from the outside. His job in the oil and gas industry required him to constantly travel between different cities and countries, and that was something Alexis absolutely loved. She loved the feeling of packing a suitcase and just leaving, road trips, last-minute flights. That feeling like life was always moving forward. Tom gave her exactly that kind of lifestyle. He was tall, heavily built, and looked more like a bodybuilder than a typical office worker. And there was also a very noticeable age gap between them. At the time, Alexis was only in her 20s, while Tom was already in his 40s. He had been married before, divorced, and had 2 children from his previous marriage. But for Alexis, none of that really seemed to matter. Friends said she genuinely liked Tom, not in some superficial, flashy way, but because she truly believed she saw something good inside him. Alexis once said she loved Tom's heart, and during the early stages of their relationship, things between them genuinely felt natural. Meanwhile, Alexis had started feeling exhausted by the pace of her work life. She was working almost non-stop. Besides Twin Peaks, Alexis was juggling several other jobs, and she was almost always in work mode. People who knew her said Alexis was the type of person who could never really sit still. But little by little, she began feeling drained by the idea of trading all of her time just to keep chasing money. And then, right around that time, Alexis started paying attention to a cosmetics company called Monat. At first, it was simply a hair care brand she was personally using. But Alexis quickly realized that what Monat was really selling wasn't just shampoo or beauty products. It was an entire lifestyle. If you've never heard of it before, Monat stands for Modern Nature. It's an American beauty and hair care company founded in Florida in 2014. The company became well known for its MLM business model, short for multi-level marketing. What Monat sold wasn't just shampoo or cosmetics. It was the image of a financially free lifestyle. The company recruited independent sellers, usually influencers or social media users, to sell products, build teams, recruit new people into the system, and earn money from the sales generated by the network beneath them. Between 2017 and 2020, Monat absolutely exploded on Instagram and TikTok across the United States, especially among young women chasing influencer lifestyle culture. People constantly posted luxury travel photos, cars, laptop lifestyle content, beach resorts, work from anywhere, girl boss culture, and that whole luxury freedom aesthetic. It was an image of financial freedom, travel, online work, and the kind of perfect life American social media was obsessed with at the time. And Alexis quickly blended into that world. Unlike many people who joined MLM companies and quit a few months later, Alexis seemed to find her place almost immediately. In a short amount of time, she left her old jobs behind to focus full-time on Monat and building her social media brand. According to information released by Monat at the time, people who reached the executive director level could earn an average of tens of thousands of dollars per month, and Alexis was gradually moving toward that position. Her life started changing very quickly. Constant travel, luxury retreats, a rapidly growing Instagram following, and the image of a young woman living the dream life was slowly being perfected across social media. But like so many influencer stories we've seen since then, the more perfect things looked on the outside, the more complicated everything behind the scenes sometimes really was. By the summer of 2019, Alexis and Tom's relationship had become very serious. The two got engaged, and not long afterward, decided to move to Colorado to start a new life together. At the time, Colorado was almost a dream state for many young Americans. Mountains, road trips, nature, that free-spirited lifestyle. And for Alexis, it looked exactly like the kind of life she had always imagined for herself. They moved to Colorado in August 2019 and stayed there through the final months of the year. During that period, Alexis's social media was almost completely filled with travel content. The two constantly drove through mountain highways, visited famous locations across Colorado, and documented nearly everything through vlogs and Instagram clips. In those videos, they looked exactly like the perfect influencer lifestyle couple. There were shots of Tom smiling in front of the rocky landscapes at Colorado National Monument. Moments of the two embracing at Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Then Garden of the Gods, long open roads, golden evening sunlight, kisses in front of the camera. In December 2019, Alexis and Tom officially got married at a courthouse in Colorado. There was no lavish wedding or massive ceremony, just a quiet marriage registration between the two of them. A few months later, they left Colorado and moved back to Texas, this time to Houston. At that point, Alexis was only 26 years old, while Tom was already 49. Houston gave Alexis a fresh start. A bigger city, more opportunities, and it also became the place where she started building her own social circle. November 26, 2020, Thanksgiving Day. That morning, Alexis was still texting her mother like usual. Just a few short messages wishing each other a happy Thanksgiving. Since both of them were busy, they didn't talk on the phone that day. Nothing about the conversation made the family feel concerned. That evening, Alexis went to Tanya Ricardo's house for Thanksgiving dinner with a group of friends. One thing a few people later remembered was Tom wasn't there with her. Now, of course, that didn't automatically mean there were problems in the marriage. A lot of couples spend holidays separately with friends or family. But for people who knew Alexis, it still felt a little unusual for a newly married couple not to spend Thanksgiving together. Especially because Alexis genuinely loved holidays like this. After dinner, Alexis continued hanging out with another friend. The two went to a bar and stayed out until around 3 a.m. Before heading home, Alexis texted Tanya saying she was stopping back by the house to pick up a few things she had accidentally left after dinner. But Tanya was already asleep and didn't see the message. Based on what friends and investigators later pieced together, Alexis got into her car and drove home early the next morning. And then Black Friday began. For most Americans, Black Friday is basically the biggest shopping event of the year. But for influencers and people working in social media marketing like Alexis, that day mattered even more. It was when brands launched massive sales, influencers posted nonstop, live-streamed nonstop, and promoted products almost all day long. Especially in the MLM world like Monet, Black Friday was practically one of the busiest days of the entire year. And that's when people started noticing something very unusual. Alexis disappeared from social media. The last time Alexis's friends saw her active in the group chat was sometime between 6 and 6:30 p.m. that evening. After that, everything suddenly went silent. No new Instagram stories, no TikToks, no messages. Not a single post all throughout Black Friday. And for Alexis, that was almost impossible. Her friends knew Alexis's habits very well. Her phone was almost always in her hand, especially on a major social media marketing day like Black Friday. Alexis completely disappearing from the internet started making people feel uneasy. Then a few hours later, Tom started texting a man named John, the boyfriend of one of Alexis's close friends. Tom asked whether they had heard anything from Alexis, but what immediately felt strange to John was that the entire conversation was happening through text messages. To John, the situation sounded way too serious to just casually text back and forth about. Eventually, around 11 p.m., he decided to call Tom directly. The phone call lasted around 45 minutes, and that was when Tom said Alexis was missing. According to Tom at the time, he and Alexis had gotten into an argument before she left the house. Tom claimed Alexis stormed off after the fight, but what made John feel uneasy wasn't just the story itself. It was the way Tom told it. Later, when people started comparing timelines, they realized Tom's version of events changed several times. At first, Tom said the two of them had argued, and later he claimed there had never been any argument at all. By that evening, sometime before 9:00 p.m., Alexis's friends started believing this was no longer a normal loss of contact situation. it was actually them, not Tom, who decided to call the police and file the very first missing person report. Right after that, Alexis's mother, Stacey Robinall, along with her friends, began posting across social media, hoping someone out there had seen her. Instagram, Facebook, stories, group posts. The hashtags Justice for Lex and Justice for Alexis started appearing everywhere as friends tried to get the attention of the Houston community. In one heartbreaking post, Alexis's mother wrote that the family had not heard from her in more than 24 hours and begged people to help bring her daughter home safely. They also shared information about Alexis's white Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, hoping someone might have spotted her somewhere in the city. That same morning, Houston city workers discovered the body of a woman along the side of a road near Interstate 10, about 17 miles west of downtown Houston. At first, the scene made a few people think it was just a mannequin dumped on the roadside, until they got closer. The woman's body was lying right off the side of the road. There were no signs of a traffic accident, no clothing, no personal belongings nearby. And what disturbed the city workers the most was that her body appeared almost unnaturally clean. According to the initial reports, the body showed no mud, dirt, or obvious signs of being dragged. Everything about the scene looked almost unreal, as if someone had placed her there just minutes earlier. The way the body was positioned on the ground also seemed very strange. Strange enough that the first driver who passed by thought it was just a mannequin dumped on the roadside. He didn't stop right away, but the feeling that something was wrong kept bothering him, so he decided to call his supervisor. When the supervisor drove out to check the area, he noticed a pair of legs partially visible through the grass near the roadside. At first, he still wasn't completely sure what he was looking at, but as soon as he got closer, he immediately called 911.
As we was driving, we could see the feet, so we got out and looked, and there it was. She was laying there, deceased. She was no clothes on, and I just got on the phone and I called 911.
When police processed the scene, the body had no personal belongings with it. No phone, no wallet, no shoes. Her body had been left along Red Haw Lane, near Interstate 10 in West Houston. According to the initial investigation, police believed the body had been there overnight. The scene also suggested the killer had made almost no effort to hide the body. Alexis's body was left fairly exposed near the roadside, visible enough for city workers to quickly notice it the next morning. Meanwhile, Alexis's family still had no idea what had happened. That Sunday morning, they were still hoping she was alive, partly because Alexis's phone was reportedly still showing signs of activity for a period of time after she disappeared. But on the other side of the city, Tom Sharkey had already been taken by police to identify the body. And not long after that, the victim's identity was officially confirmed. It was Alexis Sharkey. The news quickly began appearing across local Houston news stations.
New details on the death of Alexis Robinall, who goes by Alexis Sharkey, a 26-year-old Instagram influencer from Texas. Houston police confirm she was found dead without any of her clothes on around the 3-mile mark from her apartment, also near the Interstate 10 frontage road in northwest Houston. Investigators say she had no visible injuries on her body, and they're still waiting on the autopsy to determine how she died. Sharkey's mother tells reporters her daughter was murdered. Friends said in the weeks leading up to her death, Sharkey said she was worried about someone close in her life. Katie Johnston for CBS 11 News.
By the end of that day, everything on social media had completely changed. The missing person posts slowly started turning into memorial tributes. Alexis' friends kept reposting photos of her, while the comment sections filled with unanswered questions. Friends were still sharing missing person flyers online, not knowing Alexis had already been found. And then her mother, Stacey Robitno, posted the message that no mother should ever have to write. She wrote, "With deeply broken hearts, Mike and I want to let all of you know that Lexi's body has been found. We do not know how to begin to thank all of you for the love and kind words you have shown our family. Please give us time to grieve this enormous loss to our family and to this world. We will miss her. We love you." As information about the crime scene started appearing in the media, a lot of people immediately began asking the same question. If this was a homicide, then why were there almost no obvious signs of physical trauma on Alexis's body? No clearly visible wounds, no large amount of blood at the scene. And because of that, in the early stages, Houston police had not even officially classified the case as a homicide yet. But the internet didn't wait that long. As soon as the story started spreading across social media and local news, theories began appearing almost immediately. Some people believed Alexis may have been poisoned. Others thought she could have accidentally overdosed on drugs. And then some people started bringing up the possibility of strangulation. Because in many cases, that kind of killing can leave very little visible trauma at first glance. The lack of visible injuries only made the case more confusing.
I don't know what happened, but I do know it was not an accident. So I don't know what precipitated this. I don't know any, but I feel like I will when this all pans out, and I will be an advocate for it not to happen to anybody else.
After the autopsy confirmed that Alexis died from strangulation, the investigation quickly began shifting toward her marriage to Tom Sharkey. And that was when Alexis's close friends started speaking more openly about the things she had told them during the final weeks of her life.
I looked at her and I was like, she's petrified. This girl is scared for her life.
Another friend told the Daily Beast that Alexis confided in her that she and her husband were having marital problems and that he had been putting hands on her. There were also reports she wanted a divorce. When social media erupted with commentary about the husband, he lashed out on Instagram, denying there was trouble in the marriage and saying he's helping with the investigation. "If my wife would have seen this, she would be disappointed in your actions. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. Next time, stop and think and realize you don't know it all." Reporter Steve Campion with KTRK TV in Houston has been speaking with Tom Sharkey by phone.
I asked him about the last time that he had seen Alexis, and he said, "I saw her, she was leaving, I told her not to drive under the influence, I told her not to drive intoxicated, she went anyways, and that's where we're at," is what he said. And I said, "What do you mean by that? Where was she going?" When you asked for specifics or you tried to ask for details, he wouldn't provide those.
According to friends, Alexis had already been planning to leave Tom. They said the two had started separating their bank accounts. Divorce paperwork had reportedly already been prepared, just waiting to be signed. If that was true, then the timeline of the case suddenly became extremely significant, because Alexis lost her life at the exact moment she was supposedly preparing to leave the marriage. And then another detail started spreading across the internet. During an earlier trip to Tulum, Alexis had reportedly been introduced to a Houston DJ named Sebastian. According to friends, the two quickly became close. Almost immediately, social media started doing what social media always does in high-profile cases. People began piecing together timelines, relationships, possible motives, and within just a few days, the Alexis Sharkey story was no longer being viewed as just a missing person case. It became the kind of case the internet almost believed it could solve on its own. And once the internet thinks it can solve a murder, things get loud fast. As more information started coming out, the timeline leading up to the night Alexis disappeared only became more complicated. Some friends claimed that Alexis and Sebastian, the Houston DJ she met during the Tulum trip, had started seeing each other sometime near the end of 2020. But not everyone agreed with that version of the story. Some people said the relationship was only close friendship. Others believed Alexis was trying to leave her marriage with Tom before starting anything new. And honestly, that's the problem with a lot of high-profile internet cases. Rumors start moving faster than facts. What could be confirmed more clearly was that Sebastian was the one who picked Alexis up on Thanksgiving night. He took her to a bar. The two stayed out until around 3 a.m., and afterward Alexis went back home. As for what Alexis and Sebastian really were to each other, at that point, nobody truly knew. Maybe they were starting to develop feelings for each other. Maybe it was simply a very close friendship during a time when Alexis was trying to leave Tom. It's also possible Tom knew about it and acted like he accepted it because the marriage was already falling apart. Or Tom knew and absolutely did not accept it at all. And that's the part where this story starts becoming even more tense. Because nobody truly knows how much Tom knew that night, what Alexis said to him, or what their final conversation actually looked like. But there was one thing Alexis's friends and family kept repeating over and over. Tom's story changed way too many times. In one version, Tom claimed Alexis left the apartment in a black vehicle. In another version, he said she left on foot. At one point, he said the two had argued. Later, he claimed there had been no argument at all. And honestly, when someone keeps changing basic details like that, whether she left in a car or on foot, whether there was a fight or not, it's very understandable that people start asking questions. The more Tom explained, the less the story held together. And eventually, the case started revolving around one much more specific question. What exactly did Tom Sharkey know on the night Alexis disappeared? On top of that, the more people looked at the timeline from that night, the harder Tom's story became to make sense. If Alexis really had walked out of the apartment alone in the dark and rain in Houston, then where exactly was she going? None of Alexis's close friends lived near enough for her to simply walk there. And her friends also made it very clear that nobody received any calls or messages from Alexis that night. That also made the theory that she took an Uber or got a ride from someone else seem pretty questionable. Because if Alexis had contacted anyone, there should have been some kind of trace on her phone. Messages, calls, location history, something. But based on what was publicly released at the time, there was almost no evidence suggesting Alexis had intentionally contacted anyone after returning to the apartment. And honestly, this is the kind of small detail that doesn't sound huge at first, but the more you think about it, the stranger it becomes. A young woman, late at night, cold, rainy, and dark outside, no phone, no car, no telling anyone where she was going. According to her friends, that simply did not sound like Alexis at all. Nothing about that version of the story felt normal. While the internet continued dissecting every detail of the case, Houston police stated that Tom was still cooperating with the investigation. At the same time, investigators asked Alexis's family and friends to avoid posting too much information online, partly because the case had already started attracting massive attention across social media. And honestly, I understand why police wanted that. Once a case turns into an internet obsession, people start seeing clues everywhere. Police also urged residents living near the apartment complex and surrounding roads to check their surveillance cameras, hoping to find any footage showing where Alexis may have gone after Thanksgiving night. After those interviews, Alexis's friends and family became even more vocal in the media, because to them, the way Tom described Alexis simply did not sound like the person they knew in real life at all.
She was kind to everyone. She made sure everyone was included. She was a friend to literally all.
She was just like the light of the room. Like she was just so smart and just so funny.
Everyone loved her. She was just such like a bright light. Her giggles all the time, and that's it. Like she's never a down person. Definitely the spirit that we needed in our friend group. She brought so much joy. She kept us all together.
She was always happy, always had a smile on her face. A lot of people looked up to her. She was just very, very positive, always positive, very knowledgeable, knew a lot about what was going on, loved being an influencer.
Finally, on January 19, 2021, Alexis Sharkey's official cause of death was publicly released. The autopsy report concluded that she died from strangulation. Her manner of death was officially ruled a homicide, and honestly, for many people following the case at the time, that conclusion almost just confirmed what they had suspected from the very beginning. Because if this had only been an overdose or some kind of accident, then how did Alexis end up found naked, without her phone, without any personal belongings, lying along the roadside in West Houston? As if someone had simply stopped a vehicle and left her there. Nothing about that scene looked accidental. But more importantly, once the case was officially classified as a homicide, it completely changed the scope of the Houston police investigation, and as you can probably guess, by that point, there was already one person sitting at the center of attention for both the internet and investigators alike: Tom Sharkey. However, there was one problem. By the time the case was officially confirmed as a homicide, police had almost completely lost track of Tom. According to later reports, Tom left Texas not long after Alexis's death. And what made the situation even stranger was that he did it almost entirely in silence. Tom's social media, which had once been fairly active, almost completely disappeared from the internet. And honestly, that was the moment the case started taking on the full vibe of a fugitive investigation. A wife murdered, a husband who vanished from the state almost immediately afterward. A homicide investigation growing hotter by the day. And suddenly, this wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a manhunt. It took law enforcement months to finally track down where Tom was hiding. But when they eventually found him, the story took yet another turn. Because as you know, someone can disappear from the internet for a while. But it's much harder to disappear from a federal homicide investigation forever. Eventually, authorities tracked Tom Sharkey down in the state of Georgia. And after several attempts to contact him, Tom finally agreed to provide a DNA sample to investigators in August 2021. There was just one problem. He never showed up. Tom agreed to the DNA test, and then just didn't show up. Now, I understand that under the American legal system, nobody is considered guilty until that is proven in court. And at that point, Tom had not officially been charged with anything yet. But if you look at the entire timeline, the way investigators probably saw it, it becomes very difficult not to ask questions. During the investigation, detectives also uncovered additional information about Tom and Alexis's relationship. According to investigative records released later, Tom had a history of domestic violence involving Alexis. And that detail changed the overall picture of the case quite a bit, because before that, some people still believed the marriage was simply falling apart, like many marriages do. But once allegations involving controlling behavior, manipulation, and violence started surfacing alongside the strangulation ruling, the divorce Alexis was reportedly preparing for no longer felt like a peaceful separation. It started looking more like a situation Alexis was trying to escape from. And, according to friends, Tom may have realized she was serious about leaving. That was also when investigators began believing they didn't just have a suspect. They had motive, they had history, and they had a timeline that was becoming increasingly difficult to explain in an innocent way. On September 29, 2021, investigators finally obtained an arrest warrant for Tom Sharkey. After nearly a year of investigation, the case officially entered its next phase. Now, the manhunt for Tom Sharkey had officially begun. Fortunately for law enforcement, this time Tom had not completely disappeared like before. Investigators believed he was in Fort Myers, Florida, more specifically, staying with his daughter. And honestly, this was the point where the case truly started feeling like a federal fugitive investigation. U.S. Marshals had to be extremely careful with their approach, because when someone being hunted for homicide realizes police have tracked them down, nobody can predict how they might react. Undercover officers began watching the house from a distance. No rushing in, no drawing attention, just observing. Around 10 p.m. on October 5th, 2021, they finally confirmed that Tom was inside the home. Officers saw him going in and out several times throughout the day, and according to investigators, it appeared Tom was relying on his daughter to avoid being detected. Although there was no indication she fully understood the legal situation involving her father. After confirming that Tom was still inside the house, the U.S. Marshals decided to move in the following morning. The home was quickly surrounded. And if you've ever seen U.S. Marshals body cam footage before, you already know these kinds of approaches usually happen very fast. Not much talking, not much time to react. Officers moved to the front door and knocked. Tom's daughter answered the door. According to later reports, she was quickly moved aside so law enforcement could enter the house and search for Tom. Officers began clearing the downstairs area, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. But Tom Sharkey was nowhere downstairs. And that was the moment law enforcement realized just how dangerous and unpredictable Tom Sharkey could be. While officers were still clearing the first floor of the house, a gunshot suddenly rang out from upstairs. There was no time for negotiations, no time to react. Officers immediately rushed up the stairs and entered the room where the shot had come from. Inside the bedroom, they found Tom Sharkey. He had shot himself in the head. And honestly, that was the moment the entire case changed forever. Because within just a few seconds, the only person who could fully explain what happened to Alexis on her final night was suddenly gone too. According to law enforcement reports, Tom was still showing signs of life when officers found him, but the injury was far too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Tom's death was never an official confession, and legally speaking, the case was never brought to trial in court. But for many people following the case, especially Alexis' family and friends, that act seemed to say everything. A man wanted for homicide, who fled the state, avoided investigators for months. then ended his own life the moment U.S. Marshals surrounded the house. And honestly, it became very difficult for many people not to see that as the final chapter of this story. To a lot of people, that wasn't the behavior of an innocent man. It looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. But the most heartbreaking part is this. Even after Tom's death, Alexis's family will probably never know exactly what happened inside that apartment on Thanksgiving night in 2020. They will never hear a confession, never know exactly how the argument began, never know the precise moment things spiraled out of control. And that's what makes the Alexis Sharkey case so haunting to so many people. Because in the end, this wasn't just the story of an Instagram influencer. It was the story of a young woman who was reportedly trying to leave a marriage her friends believed had become dangerous, but didn't make it out before it was too late. And technically speaking, this is also what made the Alexis Sharkey case far more complicated than the internet often wanted to believe. Because even though Tom was viewed by the public as the killer very early on, police never publicly released direct forensic evidence linking him to the murder scene. There was no confession, no trial, no official conviction handed down in court. Which means that if Tom had still been alive and the case had actually gone to trial, the final outcome may not have been as simple or predictable as the internet believed at the time. But at the same time, investigators also believed there was a strong possibility Alexis and Tom had gotten into a serious argument before she lost her life. According to what Alexis' friends later shared, there were several things that may have caused the situation to escalate. And if you look at the entire timeline of this case, from beginning to end, almost everything seems to come back to one central theme: control. Control over the relationship, control over the narrative, and in the end, control over how the story finished. According to investigators, this was most likely a case of intimate partner violence, something that, sadly, happens far more often than most people realize. And in Alexis' case, her friends believed there had been warning signs long before her death. Tom was nearly 2 decades older than her. Physically, he completely overpowered her. And according to friends, he showed controlling, manipulative, and at times violent behavior. What makes it especially heartbreaking is that Alexis seemed determined to keep the struggles inside her marriage away from social media. And honestly, that's pretty understandable too. At the time, Alexis's Instagram had become the image of a perfect life. Travel photos, luxury trips, happy couple videos, influencer lifestyle content. Everything was carefully curated to look beautiful. Alexis' family and friends later said they wished she had talked more openly about what she was going through. Not because they blamed her, but because they believed that if Alexis had felt safe enough to ask for help sooner, maybe things could have turned out differently. And that's also why the Alexis Sharkey case is still talked about today. Intimate partner violence is often imagined as bruises or obvious physical assaults. But in reality, many toxic relationships begin with control, emotional manipulation, isolation, and making the other person live in a constant state of fear. And according to Alexis's family and friends, that was exactly what they had started suspecting about Tom long before she died. From the outside, Tom looked like a successful man. Their life looked perfect on Instagram. Luxury travel, a big social circle, an influencer couple whose life always seemed fine. But behind that image, Alexis's friends said Tom had a very strong need to control her. From her emotions, to her personal relationships, to the way she lived her life. And after Alexis died, many people realized that the things they once thought felt a little off were actually warning signs of a relationship becoming dangerous. According to friends, Alexis had already been preparing to leave Tom. The divorce paperwork was reportedly almost ready. Their finances were being separated. She had started talking about her own future instead of a future with her husband. In other words, Alexis wasn't trapped without a way out. She had already started finding her way out. And honestly, that may be the most heartbreaking part of this entire story. Anyway, guys, I really want to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you believe Tom was responsible for Alexis's death? Or do you think there's still something the public never found out? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. I always read them. If you enjoy true crime documentaries told in this investigative style, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. It really helps support the channel. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch all the way to the end of the video. My name is Luca, and please take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you, and stay safe.